Hi there, welcome to AP Biofun with Dr. D. And in this video, we're going to be reviewing feedback regulation. I believe you have a very strong background in this from last year, so we're going to be reviewing some major concepts. Feedback regulation, topic 4.5. And here are here is an example of what somebody labeled as a positive feedback loop and a negative feedback loop. So let's examine them. So on the left, you will see a positive mindset, on the right, a negative mindset. And despite of what the picture says, both examples are actually examples of positive feedback loops. And let's examine them and see why that is. So here's the scenario. You enjoy playing music, so you have lots of motivation to play music. So you practice a lot, and by practicing, you're getting better and better at playing music. So as you're getting better at doing something, you enjoy it more. So you enjoy music even more than before you started. An example of a positive feedback loop. Now, here's another example. You do not like playing music, you dislike it. So you have absolutely no motivation to practice. So you practice less and less, which means you're not improving. So you're not playing better. So you're frustrated and you dislike playing music even more. Now, this is an example of a negative mindset, but it definitely is not a negative feedback loop. In everyday language, you may say it's negative because the outcome is negative. You dislike playing music. But in reality, in terms of scientific terms, this is a positive feedback loop. Why? Because the initial state, dislike playing music, is now enhanced, it's increased. You dislike it even more. So both of these are examples of positive feedback loops. Now, we know that feedback loops are used to maintain homeostasis, and I'm not going to spend much time talking about this. But what I do want to point out is that feedback loops are actually ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're used to regulate cyclical processes. For instance, feedback loops are used to regulate cell cycle and cell division, and we're going to explore this a little bit later in this unit. Feedback loops are also used to regulate circadian rhythms or circadian clocks. Circadian clocks are our internal 24-hour clocks that determine our activities. Every living organism has a circadian clock. Feedback loops are also used to regulate metabolic pathways. So if a cell needs product D, it's going to start making product D. And product D is the end product of a metabolic pathway. A turns to B, B to C, and C to D. But when you've made enough product D, you don't need to make any more, right? Why waste resources and energy? Then product D will inhibit its own synthesis by binding to and inhibiting enzyme 1, which is the first step of the metabolic pathway. So essentially, this is a negative feedback loop because the signal is a lot of product D, and the end result after the feedback loop is less product D. Another example of a negative feedback loop you're very well familiar with is regulating body temperature. So our body temperature needs to be maintained in a certain narrow range. If it decreases on the left, we'll need to do something to increase it to maintain normal body temperature. If it increases on the right, as shown on the right, we need to do something to decrease it again to fall back to the normal range, like sweating. So a variety of cooling mechanism or other mechanisms to heat the organism are activated to restore homeostasis. So both of these on the left and on the right are examples of negative feedback loop because the initial signal, raise body temperature, disappears. Now we're lowering the body temperature. The initial signal, low body temperature, disappears. Now we're raising body temperature. And negative feedback loops usually operate in pairs, just like regulating blood glucose levels to maintain the internal environment relatively constant. So here are some other examples of feedback regulation. So wound healing. When you cut yourself, when there's a wound, chemicals signal platelet activation. Platelets are the cells that help form blood clots and heal your wounds. Now, the platelets themselves release chemicals, which means that even more platelets are activated. So the initial signal is increased. This is an example of a positive feedback loop. And that leads to blood clotting and healing of wounds. Another example of a positive feedback loop is babies, when babies are being born, pressure of the child on the cervix, contractions begin, more pressure on the cervix, oxytocin is released, more contractions until the baby is born. Once the baby is born, it disappears. And finally, ripening of fruits, not just apples, but here in this case, the example is about apples. An apple, a ripe apple, will produce a plant hormone called ethylene. Ethylene signals neighboring fruit to ripen, and the neighboring apples will ripen, and the more apples ripen, the more ethylene is released and more apples ripen. So all of these are examples of positive feedback loops. Examples of negative feedback loops include osmoregulation in animals that live in salt water, and regulating blood glucose levels. As blood glucose increases, insulin is secreted and lowers blood glucose levels. As blood glucose level decrease, glucagon is released and raises blood glucose levels. The same is true for osmoregulation of marine animals, which regulate the intake of water and the intake of salts in order to maintain osmotic balance, as you can see here on the left, in the left model. And here's an example of a feedback loop that you may have not thought of. This one is a positive feedback loop. And this one we encountered in ecology. Birds in a population will lead to an increase in the population size, right? But the increase in population size will lead to more birds, more individuals, more births. So here's another example of a positive feedback loop. Now, speaking of homeostasis and feedback loops, homeostasis really in our bodies is maintained by two major systems, the endocrine system and the nervous system. Now, the endocrine system is very well adapted to maintain homeostasis because it's well adapted to coordinate gradual changes that affect the entire body. Okay, so this is perfect for maintaining homeostasis. Think insulin and glucagon. Think adrenaline. Changes are gradual and they affect the entire body, usually. The nervous system is different though. The nervous system is well suited for detecting immediate and rapid responses to the environment. And we do need those. So let's go back to the endocrine system. Remember when we talk about the glucocorticoid receptor and the glucocorticoid and steroid hormones? How do they function? Well, they function by changing the expression of genes, and gene expression changes take some time. One. But even if we're talking about peptide hormones such as insulin, because insulin has to travel to its target cells throughout the body, the changes elicited by insulin are gradual and slow. So the endocrine system, which is long distance signaling, either because it's long distance or because it employs steroid hormones, which result in changes in gene expression, is slow. It is slow, but it is gradual and it is system-wide. But there are instances where we need to respond very rapidly to the change in the environment. We can't wait for slow and gradual changes. Example, you touch something that you didn't know was hot, it's very hot. Your body needs to react right away. Your muscles need to contract and you need to pull away from that source of heat that can hurt you. Okay, The nervous system is very well suited for detecting immediate and rapid responses to the environment. The nervous system and the endocrine system actually talk to each other in the so-called neuroendocrine pathways. And this is a recurring theme in biology. Everything talks to everything. Everything interacts with everything. Everything is connected. Hormone pathways can respond to stimuli from external environment by relying on sensors in the nervous system. What I wanted to tell you finally is that there's one more place we can find feedback loops, in this case, negative feedback loops. The endocrine system itself. Here it is, the endocrine system, all the endocrine glands. The endocrine system itself operates often on negative feedback loops. And the example I'm going to show you is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland, which is located right here, produces thyroid hormones, which have wide-ranging effects throughout our body. They regulate our metabolism, they regulate cardiac function. Thyroid hormone release is controlled by glands that are present right here. So what happens? There's some kind of stimulus. Here's a sensory neuron. The sensory neuron is going to signal the hypothalamus, which is going to cause a neurosecretory cell to secrete a chemical message called TRH. This is a hormone. TRH is going to bind to target cells in another gland called the anterior pituitary, and it's going to cause another hormone to be released called TSH. TSH is now going to stimulate the thyroid gland, and the thyroid hormone is going to be released and circulate throughout our body. So let's review the steps again. Stimulus, sensory neuron detects the stimulus, causes a secretory cell to release hormone number 1, TRH. TRH causes the release of hormone number 2, TSH. TSH stimulates the thyroid gland, and the thyroid hormone, hormone number 3, is released. Thyroid hormone is what will circulate through our system and will cause changes in our metabolism and so on. Now, when there's too much thyroid hormone circulating in our system, what the thyroid hormone will do is it will inhibit the production of TSH, and it will also inhibit the production of TRH. And this is an example of a negative feedback loop. So thyroid hormone, which is the end product of this signaling, inhibits its own production by inhibiting both TSH and TRH production. And this is all for today, folks. And we are done with cellular communication. Don't forget, not all heroes wear capes. See you next time.